So this is the story behind the Mormon Immigrant Trail, how it came to be, why it's called that. Just to kind of set a little bit of background, this is a road that goes between Highway 88 and almost to Highway 50. It's actually considered an alternate route for Highway 50 to go over the mountains. The Mormon Immigrant Trail has a rich history. It's very interesting, and that's what I'd like to tell you about today. It starts with a little bit of background. There's a group of Mormons called the Mormon Battalion. They had fought the Mexican War, so it's mostly men, Mexican-American War, on the side of America, and they were here in this area kind of just waiting for their next orders from Brigham Young, which was back in Salt Lake City. So they got the orders to come home, and they were happy to do so. They'd been gone for around 2 years and wanted to see their friends and family. But this was the exact same time that gold was discovered here, right in this area. And many of these people that were in the Mormon Battalion had claims and were working the gold and had some gold. But rather than stay and do the get-rich-quick scheme, they wanted to go home to their families. So what they did is they gathered over in the Placerville area towards an area called Pleasant Valley, which is an area that exists to this day. They gathered and they tried to go over the trail, which is the California Trail, in early May. And they had to turn around and come back because of the weather, the snow, and it was a super hard trail to go over. They had to cross the river 27 times with the wagons and all their cattle. So they thought, you know, what if there's a better way that hasn't been made yet? And they decided they would make a new trail, a new way to go. And so they gathered together and they decided to leave in June. And what happened was they got all these people together, and it was not a huge group of people. I want to tell you the number here. 47 men, at least one woman, poor girl, 17 wagons, 150 horses and mules, 150 cattle, and they all planned to leave in June. And the leader of the group and a couple of scouts decided to go and check it out ahead of time. The main body of the group did not want them to leave. They didn't want them to go ahead, but they did it anyways. They felt like this was the safe thing to do, to check out the trail ahead of time. So they left, and the group waited for them to come back and tell them, you know, how they were going to proceed. But they never came back. So they waited and waited, and a month later they still weren't here. They left in July, and they went ahead and went without their leader, and they formed a new leader, and they went on the trail. Now this trailblazing was hard. It was a lot of work. They would come across impassable areas. They would have big, huge granite boulders in the way, and how they would take care of that is they would build fire on this granite boulder, and as soon as the granite got really hot, they would break it up into pieces and light another fire, and this would just be a long, long process. So they took this trail and they blazed it. They cut down trees, they moved rocks, they made it so that a wagon could go through, and that's the Mormon Immigrant Trail. That's how it started. So onward and upward. Here we are at a place that is called Tragedy Springs, and this is part of the Mormon Immigrant Trail story. So remember earlier when I said that the leaders went ahead and scouted the route for their group, and they disappeared and never came back. Along the way, the battalion came across some Native Americans that were wearing some of their clothes and had some of their belongings. So they thought, well, foul play, probably. And they came across a little area where they were buried. So they found them. There was obvious signs of a skirmish, and they even found a bag of gold from one of the leaders that they took home to his wife. But it's been called Tragedy Springs ever since, where the 3 members were found, and this plaque here in honor of them was erected in 1967. So that's part of the story. So there's a little trail that comes up from that marker with a few steps, and it's pretty steep, but it comes up to these awesome little markers. This one over here is a replica of what was actually carved into a tree, and this is supposedly the grave site. And this behind me in this little covered area is the actual springs, which is still running today. All in all, it took roughly 30 days for them to go over this trail, make this trail all the way to this point where they would go over the mountain and be down into the valley where there's no more passes, and it's much easier. There was a few guys that kind of followed after that didn't make it into the groups. They came later, and they came over that same trail in 5 days. So once it was blazed, it was much nicer and much easier for people to come through. So basically the group, they went down this area the best way that they could, but it was steep and really hard and difficult to get their wagons to go down this ravine. So what they did is they sort of took them apart a little bit, and they used a lot of chains and ropes and pulley systems to bring them down. There's chains around trees, and they just dragged them down, and they got them down to the bottom. And when they got to the bottom, they somewhere up here they saw these pretty valleys, and they named them. I think there was Hope, Faith, and Charity, but this is Hope Valley. This is Red Lake, and over there is Hope Valley. And they said when they saw that valley, they had hope that they were finally through these mountains and done. So this is the end of the pretty much the Mormon Immigrant Trail story. But as they got down this valley and they started to go down into that area, and they sort of started to see the other wagons coming for the gold rush. These people were coming west, whereas the Mormon team was going east, back to Salt Lake City. Everyone else was coming west to gather to get their gold and to come out to the gold country for the gold rush. As they started to see these people, they started to tell them about the new trail that they made, the Carson Pass trail that went a lot easier, less crossing of rivers and such as that. And so a lot more people started to divert and come over this way. All in all, this was a very, very traveled route. Sign here says somewhere between 25,000 and 45,000 people in the gold rush era went over this route, and at many times it was super crowded, like the super highway with wagon trains. At the bottom of this ravine where you see the Red Lake, there could be as many as 250 wagons waiting for their turn to come up this pass. And just think about it, you've got all of this stuff you've dragged across all the plains and all this way, and now you got to drag it up a mountain. You're kind of going to discard a few things. So at the bottom of this, there was a lot of stuff that people didn't want anymore. And for many years, you could find different artifacts. I'm not sure you could anymore, but for many years you could at the bottom of this. It's called the Devil's Ladder, and this was the end of the Carson Pass Trail that the Mormons blazed and made into a very well-traveled route that is well-traveled to this day. So there you have it, behind-the-scenes story for Mormon Immigrant Trail.